Welcome to the Veil of Truth, your gateway to uncovering hidden insights and illuminating mysteries. I'm thrilled you've joined our global community. Whether you're watching from a bustling city skyline or a quiet countryside, we're glad you're here. Globe showing Europe, Africa, so tell me, where are you tuning in from today? Chapter 1: A Country Gathering. The journey to Ashcroft Manor had been long, though by no means disagreeable, for Hercule Poirot always found amusement in the study of his fellow travellers. To one so observant, even the smallest details of behaviour furnished abundant entertainment. The train compartment had been warm, the countryside drowsy beneath the early autumn sun, and Poirot, trim and immaculate as ever in his grey suit and bowler hat, allowed himself to indulge in a little reflection. He had received Lady Ashcroft's invitation quite unexpectedly. It was couched in the most charming of terms, an appeal to his sense of companionship rather than his reputation as a detective. "We are gathering a small company at the manor," she had written. "Reginald is eager to see fresh faces, and I recall with great pleasure our conversation in London last spring. Might I prevail upon you to join us for a weekend of quiet diversion?" Poirot, though usually reluctant to remove himself from his comfortable London flat, had accepted. Perhaps it was the nostalgia of the English countryside, or perhaps the faint stirrings of curiosity, for he was seldom deceived by such invitations. Beneath the veil of sociability, there is so often a purpose. The motorcar that met him at the station brought him swiftly through winding lanes lined with hedgerows, to where Ashcroft Manor rose solemn and ancient against the dusky sky. It was a building of stern grey stone, softened somewhat by ivy and the gold of autumn leaves. Poirot, descending, straightened his cuffs with fastidious care, and surveyed his destination with a judicious eye. A butler received him, a grave, silent man named Harcourt, who ushered him into the great hall where the other guests had already assembled. The scene had a certain charm, the blaze of a fire in the vast hearth, the gleam of polished oak, the murmur of voices. Yet Poirot, entering quietly, perceived at once that this was no gathering of unclouded harmony. Lady Ashcroft, a tall woman with fine bearing and silvered hair, greeted him warmly. She had the air of one accustomed to preside, her manner gracious yet faintly anxious. Beside her stood Sir Reginald, still erect despite his years, his expression stern but softened in the moment by the courtesy he extended to his guest. His eyes, however, were keen, those of a man who had once judged harshly and without indulgence from the bench. Poirot's gaze moved on. The young man by the mantelpiece, hands thrust into pockets with studied nonchalance, was clearly Julian Ashcroft, the heir. His features bore the good looks of youth, but his eyes darted restlessly, as though measuring the company against some private discontent. Not far from him stood a young lady, Clara Whitfield, whom Poirot discerned to be the niece. Her dark eyes were quick and lively, and her laughter rang with a charm that seemed almost too carefully employed. She was dressed with elegance that spoke of modern taste, yet there lingered about her something watchful, calculating. Another figure attracted Poirot's notice, Reverend Cole, a man of middle years with a gentle countenance and spectacles perched precariously upon his nose. His voice, when he spoke, was soft, almost apologetic, yet Poirot's ears detected beneath it a current of suppressed intensity. And finally there was Mrs. Statham, a widow of ample fortune, who carried herself with the complacency of wealth and the faint hauteur of one conscious of her independence. She looked upon the others with a detached interest, as though assessing their place in her own scheme of things. Completing the company was Dr. Henry Larch, the local physician, whose kindly manner and brisk gestures suggested a man accustomed to both trust and responsibility. He was a figure of reassurance, yet Poirot, whose eyes missed nothing, observed the slight stiffness in his smile, as though it concealed more than it revealed. Introductions made, Lady Ashcroft led them all to the drawing-room where tea awaited. Conversation flowed with outward ease, but Poirot's sensitive ear detected the small frictions that underlay the politeness, the faint sharpness with which Julian contradicted his father, the pointed interest Mrs. Statham displayed in Clara's every word, the nervous glance Reverend Cole cast whenever Sir Reginald's judicial career was mentioned. For himself, Poirot sipped delicately at his cup and contributed little. He was content to observe, to let the personalities reveal themselves in their natural course. To him, people were like books, each requiring only patience and attention to disclose its secrets. Dinner followed in due course, and with it a greater formality. The dining room, long and shadowed, was lit by candles that flickered against the portraits of Ashcroft's long deceased. Conversation became more animated, and here, too, Poirot took note of the small betrayals of character, Clara's gaiety a little too forced, Julian's laughter edged with bitterness, Lady Ashcroft's attempts to smooth over discord with a tact born of long practice. Sir Reginald presided with solemn dignity, his voice measured, his opinions delivered with the certainty of one long accustomed to authority. And yet Poirot observed, with the keen eye of the psychologist, a certain weariness in the old judge, an impatience, as though the effort of maintaining command grew heavier with each passing year. It was during the serving of the final course that Sir Reginald rose, glass in hand, to propose a toast. His words were formal, yet not without warmth, dwelling upon the pleasure of old companionship and the promise of youth. He raised his glass of Madeira high, and all followed suit. Poirot, lifting his own glass, allowed his gaze to travel once more about the table. Each face, each gesture, told a story. To the ordinary eye, it was merely a convivial gathering. To Poirot, it was a tableau of human nature, ambition, resentment, secrecy, and pride, all masked beneath the polish of civility. He smiled faintly to himself. He had come expecting diversion, and perhaps he should not be disappointed. For already, though no crime had yet been committed, he felt the subtle undercurrent that so often preceded it. "Mais oui," murmured Poirot softly, setting down his glass. "Where there are secrets, there will soon be revelations. And where there is human passion, there may, alas, be tragedy." The clock struck 9, the fire crackled, and outside, the night deepened over Ashcroft Manor. Within, the company laughed and conversed, but Poirot sat very still, his little grey cells already stirring with foreboding. The stage was set. Chapter 2, The Toast. The long dining table of Ashcroft Manor glowed under the soft radiance of candlelight. Silverware gleamed, crystal glasses shimmered, and the scent of roasted pheasant mingled with autumnal flowers arranged in tall vases at either end. The air was heavy with an old-world elegance, and yet Poirot, seated midway down the table, could not help but feel that beneath this polished surface there lurked disquiet. Sir Reginald Ashcroft presided at the head, upright as a magistrate still upon the bench, though his frame was lean and his hair turned white. He spoke sparingly, his tone curt but commanding. Now and again, he directed a question to Dr. Larch about the health of villagers, or to Reverend Cole about the Sunday sermon. These inquiries had the air of cross-examination rather than polite curiosity, and the recipients answered with a certain carefulness, as though before a judge still in office. Lady Ashcroft, at the opposite end, laboured to maintain a gentler atmosphere. Her voice, musical though strained, guided conversation back to lighter topics whenever it strayed towards discord. "Reginald," she murmured once, almost reproachfully, "we must not weary our guests with matters of duty." But Sir Reginald merely inclined his head, unmoved. Julian, their son, leaned back in his chair with the indolent posture of one determined to show disregard. He toyed with his wine, his gaze restless, his mouth twitching into wry smiles whenever his father spoke. Poirot, observing closely, saw in him the impatience of youth shackled by paternal authority. His eyes, darting to Clara across the table, softened for a moment, and Poirot registered that glance, filing it quietly away. Clara, the niece, sat in vivid contrast, animated, laughing, her words quick and bright. She spoke of a recent play in London, of new dances, of fashion soon to sweep through Mayfair. Yet beneath the gaiety, Poirot detected a faint brittleness, as though her mirth served as a shield against some heavier emotion. Mrs. Statham, the wealthy widow, contributed little but watched much. she appraised each speaker with the cool eye of one accustomed to weighing value. Her gaze lingered often upon Clara, less so upon Julian, as though studying the interplay between them. Poirot, sensitive to such unspoken scrutiny, wondered what conclusions she drew. Reverend Cole, mild and deferential, attempted small remarks, but his words faltered when Sir Reginald's sharp eyes fell upon him. Poirot noticed how his hand shook when lifting a fork, and how perspiration glistened faintly at his brow despite the coolness of the room. A nervous man, yes, but of nerves born of timidity or of some hidden guilt. Dr. Larch, seated near Poirot, spoke cheerfully of medical matters, of influenza, and the virtues of quinine. Yet his conversation flowed too smoothly, as though rehearsed, like a man eager to appear at ease. Poirot's moustaches twitched in faint amusement. One hides something, yes, he mused inwardly, but what, precisely? Course after course arrived, soup, fish, pheasant, a fine pudding. The butler Harcourt moved silently, a figure of solemn precision. The clink of cutlery, the rise and fall of voices, the occasional burst of laughter, all created a veneer of festivity. Yet to Poirot, who missed nothing, it was clear that this household bore its tensions like fine cracks in porcelain, visible only to those who cared to look closely. At last came the Madeira, served in delicate crystal. Sir Reginald raised his glass, and the company followed suit. The judge cleared his throat, his gaze sweeping across them all. "My friends," he began, his voice resonant, "it is not often that I permit myself indulgence in such gatherings. My life has been one of duty, sometimes a stern duty, but tonight, I allow myself the pleasure of companionship. We drink, then, to the bonds of family, of loyalty, and of truth." He lifted the glass higher. All rose slightly, glasses aloft. Poirot, ever punctilious, did likewise. Yet his eyes, darting swiftly from face to face, caught the flicker of emotions revealed in that instant, Julian's lips tightening with some private bitterness, Clara's smile that did not quite reach her eyes, Reverend Cole's swallow, convulsive, as though the word truth struck too near his heart, Mrs. Statham's composed serenity, betraying nothing, Lady Ashcroft's faint sigh, weary yet resigned, Dr. Larch's steady watch upon Sir Reginald, as though measuring him. Sir Reginald drank. It was but a moment before the change came. He lowered the glass, stiffened, and his eyes widened with sudden horror. A harsh cough broke from his throat. His hand clutched at the table, fingers splaying across the white cloth. "Reginald," cried Lady Ashcroft, half rising. The judge's face contorted, his lips moving without sound. He staggered to his feet, then collapsed forward across the table, the glass slipping from his grasp and shattering upon the floor. The golden Madeira spread like a dark stain across the cloth. A cry went up. Clara gasped sharply, covering her mouth with trembling fingers. Julian leapt from his chair, his voice hoarse, "Father!" Reverend Cole whispered a broken prayer, while Mrs. Statham's eyes widened, but she remained composed. Dr. Larch hurried round, kneeling beside the stricken man. His hands moved swiftly, examining, pressing against the neck, the wrist. His face hardened. "It is useless," he said at last, voice grave. "He is dead." "Dead?" Lady Ashcroft repeated, her voice breaking. She sank back into her chair, her hand clutching at her throat. Poirot, who had remained very still, now leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. With delicate fingers, he lifted the fallen glass. He sniffed, and at once his nostrils quivered. The faint, unmistakable odor drifted upward, bitter almonds. "Cyanide," he murmured softly. Then, rising, his small figure seemed suddenly to command the room. "Mesdames, messers," he said firmly, "we must be calm. Sir Reginald is indeed dead, poisoned. And since the glass was handed to him here, at this table, it is certain that one among us has placed it." A silence fell, heavy and oppressive. The crackle of the fire was suddenly loud, the ticking of the clock intrusive. Every face turned to the little Belgian, whose eyes glowed with steady fire. Julian's voice broke the stillness. "You mean, one of us murdered him?" Poirot inclined his head. "It is precisely what I mean. The poison acted too swiftly, too certainly, for any accident. Sir Reginald Ashcroft has been deliberately murdered." Clara uttered a low moan. Reverend Cole muttered incoherently of divine judgment. Mrs. Statham's lips pressed together in a line of steel. Lady Ashcroft covered her face with her hands. Poirot raised one finger. "It is of the first importance that none should leave this room until the police arrive. But in the meantime, permit me one observation." His gaze swept over them, sharp as a blade. "Murder is not born of chance, Miss Amos. It is born of motive, of opportunity, of character. Each of you, tonight, will be weighed by these little grey cells of Hercule Poirot." His words hung in the air. The guests shifted uneasily, as though a net had been cast over them. Outside, the wind moaned faintly through the trees, and within the manor, silence and fear reigned. Thus ended the dinner at Ashcroft Manor, not with laughter and toasts, but with death at the table and suspicion in every heart. And Poirot, his moustaches bristling, thought quietly, "It begins." Chapter 3, Suspicion Falls. The company sat frozen in the dining room, as though time itself had paused at the moment of Sir Reginald's collapse. The candles still burned steadily, their light gilding the silver and glass, but the gaiety of moments before had dissolved into a silence heavy with dread. Lady Ashcroft remained rigid in her chair, her hands clenched tightly together. Her eyes, wide and unseeing, were fixed upon her husband's lifeless body, which Dr. Larch had covered with a napkin taken from the sideboard. Clara, white-faced, pressed a handkerchief to her lips, though Poirot observed that no tears fell from her eyes. Julian stood stiff and defiant, his fists clenched at his sides, as though daring anyone to accuse him. Reverend Cole muttered disjointed prayers under his breath, while Mrs. Statham sat perfectly composed, her expression betraying no more than polite concern. Poirot, stepping forward, cleared his throat. The soft sound seemed to command attention more than any shout might have done. "Mesdames, messers," he said firmly, "I must ask for calm. Sir Reginald is dead, yes, by poison. But the manner of his death is no less important than the fact itself. Already, certain matters are clear." Julian turned sharply. "Clear? What do you mean? You cannot possibly know who." Poirot raised a finger, and the young man fell silent, though his jaw tightened. "The poison was administered in the glass of Madeira Sir Reginald alone drank. The scent is unmistakable to one such as myself. Therefore, someone at this table placed it, or contrived that it should be placed, before him. The police must be summoned at once, but until their arrival, it is my duty, as one who has some little experience in such matters, to ensure that nothing is disturbed." Dr. Larch rose, his voice brisk. "I shall telephone the constabulary immediately." "Merci, Doctor," said Poirot. "But you will forgive me if I request that Harcourt, the butler, make the call. It is essential that no guest removes himself from observation, even briefly." The physician hesitated, then nodded curtly. Poirot turned to Harcourt, who had remained at the door, pale but steady. "Be so good, monsieur, and summon the police. Say to them that Hercule Poirot requests their immediate attendance." The butler inclined his head and departed. A faint stir went through the company, as though the mention of Poirot's name had fixed the situation in a new and more fearful light. "Now," Poirot continued gently, "I must ask each of you for patience. Murder casts suspicion widely, but suspicion is not proof. The truth, it reveals itself only when each detail is considered. Already, however, one fact is evident: Sir Reginald was a man of consequence, a man who, in his life, may have made enemies as well as friends. But the hand that struck tonight, it was no stranger's hand. It was one seated here. Clara gave a small, stifled cry. Lady Ashcroft swayed in her chair, but Poirot went on without pause. Julian's voice rang out harshly. "You're implying it was one of us? My family? My friends? That's monstrous." Poirot's eyes rested on him. "Monstrous, perhaps, but not impossible, Monsieur Julian. You, for instance, inherit greatly by your father's death." A gasp came from Clara, and Lady Ashcroft raised her head with sudden sharpness. Julian flushed scarlet. "How dare you?" "Yes, I inherit, but do you think I would stoop to this foulness? He was my father, for God's sake." Poirot's tone was calm, unhurried. Many a son has wished for independence sooner than it came. Resentment, financial embarrassment, ambition, all may tempt. I accuse you of nothing, I only state the fact that suspicion, how do you say, falls naturally upon you first. Julian's lips pressed tight, but he said no more. Clara reached across the table, as if to comfort him, but her hand stopped halfway, uncertain. Poirot noted the gesture. Reverend Cole spoke suddenly, his voice trembling. "Surely, Monsieur Poirot, we should not speak so openly, there are ladies present." "Mais oui," said Poirot gently, "but poison respects no delicacy, Monsieur le Reverend. It is a weapon often chosen for its subtlety, and subtlety we must meet with candor." Mrs. Statham cleared her throat. Her voice was smooth, almost indifferent. "If we are to cast suspicions, Monsieur Poirot, then perhaps we should consider motives beyond inheritance. Sir Reginald, after all, was not universally loved. His judgments from the bench, his severity, they made enemies enough." Poirot inclined his head. "Just so, madam. And yet, it was not one of those enemies from the world outside who placed the poison in his glass. It was someone with access to his wine at this table, or in this house." Lady Ashcroft's voice, low but firm, now broke the silence. "Monsieur Poirot, my husband was a stern man, yes, but he was also a just one. I will not believe that anyone beneath this roof could so dishonor him." Poirot bowed slightly. "Madam, your loyalty does you credit. But I must think of justice, not of sentiment. You will forgive me if I observe what I observe." He moved to the table once more, lifting another glass, sniffing delicately. "The others, they are free of scent. Only that of Sir Reginald bore the poison. Which means, it was either tampered with before it reached the table, or exchanged with another after." "By the servants, then?" Julian demanded. Poirot shook his head. "Perhaps. Yet consider, Harcourt poured from the decanter into each glass. I observed closely. No servant lingered near your father's glass more than another. No, this was the work of someone who could calculate opportunity amidst the bustle of service." Clara spoke then, her voice unsteady. But if it was so quick, surely he must have noticed something odd in the taste." Poirot smiled faintly. "Ah, mademoiselle, but cyanide, it works swiftly, so swiftly that a man may scarcely remark the bitterness before it seizes his throat." A shudder ran through the company. Lady Ashcroft pressed a handkerchief to her lips. It was then that the sound of footsteps echoed, and Harcourt returned. "Inspector Wetherell and Sergeant Briggs are on their way, sir," he said gravely to Poirot. "Très bien," Poirot replied. He turned back to the company, his gaze sharp. "Until their arrival, I beg you all to remain here. It is in moments of confusion that guilty persons seek to act, whether to destroy evidence, or to prepare an alibi. That, I cannot permit." Julian laughed harshly. "You speak as though we were criminals already." Poirot regarded him evenly. "I speak, monsieur, as one who knows that the murderer often hides in plain sight. For the innocent, patience is all that is required. For the guilty, even patience betrays them. The silence that followed was taut, oppressive. Each guest seemed to shrink into themselves, as though suddenly aware of being observed, weighed, measured. Outside, the wind sighed against the windows, and the great clock in the hall struck the quarter hour with solemn chimes. Poirot stood motionless, his small hands folded, his moustaches quivering slightly as he surveyed the uneasy company. In that moment, suspicion hung in the air like smoke, drifting, shifting, settling by turns upon each face. And so it was that the shadow of murder fell across Ashcroft Manor, binding all within its walls under the gaze of Hercule Poirot. Chapter 4, Whispers in the Corridor. The manor had fallen into an uneasy silence after the grim discovery. The arrival of Inspector Wetherell and Sergeant Briggs had brought a certain relief. Authority now bore the burden of inquiry, but even their presence could not lift the oppressive air. Lady Ashcroft had been escorted to her room, faint and trembling. The other guests were left to wander, each seeking solace in solitude, though solitude offered little comfort when suspicion pressed so close. Poirot, meanwhile, chose not to rest. He moved about the house with the quiet authority of one accustomed to command. His small, neat footsteps carried him along dimly lit corridors, his sharp eyes noting every detail, the faint scuff of mud upon a rug, a vase shifted slightly from its usual place, the hurried closing of a door when its occupant thought themselves unobserved. Always, he murmured to himself, it is in the little things that truth reveals itself. Murder, it does not flourish without leaving its trace, none, it is like a weed, it grows, it tangles, it spreads. As he passed the library, Poirot's keen ear caught the low murmur of voices. He paused, arranging his features into impassive calm, and tilted his head slightly. The door was ajar, the voices hushed but urgent. It was Mrs. Statham speaking, her tone crisp. You must not speak of it, not now. To breathe a word would ruin everything. A softer reply followed, Clara's voice, tremulous yet defiant. But how long can we go on concealing it? Don't you see, the more we hide, the worse it will appear if it comes to light. Mrs. Statham's answer was sharp. Better it should remain hidden altogether. I warn you, my dear, silence is your only shield. Poirot moved away noiselessly, his mind occupied. A secret between the young woman and the widow, eh? And spoken with fear. But what secret? Something of inheritance, perhaps, or of love. There is always love, complicating everything. Further down the corridor, he encountered Reverend Cole. The clergyman started guiltily as though caught in some mischief, though he held nothing more incriminating than a well-thumbed Bible. His eyes, behind their spectacles, darted nervously. Ah, Monsieur Poirot, he stammered, I was, seeking a quiet place for prayer. Poirot inclined his head politely. A commendable occupation, Monsieur le Reverend. And yet you look troubled. Perhaps it is not the soul of Sir Reginald alone for whom you pray. Cole flushed, gripping the Bible tightly. I pray for us all. Death, so sudden, so violent, it shakes one's faith. We are but dust, Monsieur Poirot. Dust and frailty. Ah, dust, Poirot murmured, his eyes fixed on the clergyman. But also conscience, which is sometimes heavier than stone. He left the Reverend trembling in the shadows and proceeded to the study. The door was locked, guarded now by Sergeant Briggs, who nodded respectfully. Inspector's orders, sir. Best not to disturb till he's ready. Poirot smiled faintly. Quite right, mon ami. But tell me, when you entered with the inspector, did you observe anything unusual? The sergeant scratched his head. Well, sir, there were letters on the desk, tied up neat, but one bundle looked as though it had been handled lately. Papers scattered, too. Inspector said we'd examine them proper in the morning. Très bien, Poirot replied. It is enough for the moment. He continued his wanderings, his mind arranging observations like pieces of a puzzle. Julian had disappeared to the smoking room, Clara was closeted in her chamber, Mrs. Statham had retired with ostentatious calm. Dr. Larch moved briskly about, consulting with the inspector, but Poirot noted how his eyes avoided meeting his own. Later, as Poirot ascended the grand staircase, he encountered Harcourt, the butler, descending with careful steps. His face was pale, his manner subdued. "A trying night, monsieur," Poirot observed gently. Harcourt inclined his head. "Indeed, sir." Sir Reginald, he was a hard master, but fair in his way. This will shake the household to its foundations. Poirot regarded him keenly. "You have served long, n'est-ce pas?" 30 years, sir. I have seen the family through many changes. And yet, Poirot said softly, you look as though this death weighs on you more than duty alone demands. The butler hesitated. Sir Reginald had enemies, Monsieur Poirot. Not merely outside, but within these walls. It is not for me to speak, but he broke off abruptly, lowering his voice. Forgive me. I have said too much. Poirot touched his arm lightly. Sometimes, mon ami, to say too little is more dangerous than to say too much. Remember that. Harcourt bowed and continued on his way, leaving Poirot thoughtful. So, the faithful servant, too, has his fears. Truly, this house is full of whispers. At midnight, Poirot retired briefly to his chamber. But even there, sleep would not come. He sat at the small writing desk, arranging his notes with meticulous care. Julian, clear motive in inheritance, temperament restless, defiant. Too obvious? Clara, concealment, secret with Mrs. Statham. Emotional, yet controlled. Mrs. Statham, wealthy, detached. But why counsel silence to Clara? Reverend Cole, nervous, guilty manner. Something in his past? Dr. Larch, authority in pronouncing poison, knowledge and access. Calm, but perhaps too calm. Lady Ashcroft, grief genuine? Or fear of disgrace? Poirot tapped his pen thoughtfully. It is like a chessboard, each piece in place, yet the moves not yet revealed. But already I see, the motive, it lies not only in money. There is also reputation, love, perhaps revenge. Ah, but which? Which? A sound interrupted his meditation, the faint creak of floorboards in the corridor. Poirot rose silently and opened his door a fraction. The hall was dim, lit only by a single lamp. A figure moved stealthily along the passage, pausing outside a door before slipping inside. Poirot's eyes glinted. It was Clara Whitfield. And the door she entered was Julian's. He closed his own door softly, his moustaches bristling. Ah, mes enfants, so that is how the matter stands. A clandestine love affair, n'est-ce pas? Dangerous, very dangerous, when inheritance and scandal walk hand in hand. He resumed his seat, a faint smile upon his lips. Yes, the whispers in the corridor, they tell me much. And soon, I think, they will tell me all. Chapter 5, A Locked Study. Morning broke reluctantly over Ashcroft Manor. A pale, misty light filtered through the tall windows, lending the corridors a ghostly pallor. The household, though awake, moved in hushed tones. No one lingered long in conversation, no one wished to meet another's eye. The shadow of Sir Reginald's sudden death still hung heavily in the air. Inspector Wetherell had spent half the night taking statements, assisted by the ever-dutiful Sergeant Briggs. Both men, though competent in their way, lacked the subtlety that Poirot knew was essential in such a matter. Murder by poison was not the crime of passion that blazed hotly and left its trail plain to see, it was the crime of calculation, of concealment. Poirot, therefore, sought permission to examine Sir Reginald's private study. The inspector hesitated at first, his blunt face set in lines of authority. "Now see here, Monsieur Poirot," he said, "we must follow proper procedure. Evidence, once disturbed, is evidence weakened." Poirot inclined his head politely. "But of course, mon cher inspector. Yet consider, who better than Hercule Poirot to observe the little details that others might pass by? I promise, nothing will be touched that should not be." Wetherell, conscious of Poirot's reputation, relented. "Very well. But Sergeant Briggs will accompany you." And so it was that Poirot, with the sergeant in tow, entered the late judge's study. The room was large but sombre, lined with shelves of law books whose spines bore the stern titles of legal volumes. Heavy curtains shut out the morning sun, and the air smelt faintly of ink, paper, and old leather. Poirot moved slowly, his eyes taking in everything, the worn indent in the carpet where Sir Reginald's chair had stood, the scattering of ashes in the grate, the neat arrangement of pens upon the desk. He touched nothing at first, merely allowing his gaze to wander. "It is here," he murmured softly, "that the man lived truly. In the dining room he presided, in the drawing room he conversed, but here he was himself." On the great oak desk lay an orderly stack of documents. Wills, deeds, legal correspondences, all filed with judicial precision. But one drawer, Poirot noticed, was locked. He bent, examining the keyhole. It bore faint scratches, as though a key had been inserted hastily, even clumsily, within the last day or two. "Sergeant," Poirot said, "have you the keys that were found upon Sir Reginald's person?" Briggs produced a ring. With delicate fingers, Poirot selected the correct key and turned it. The drawer opened smoothly. Inside lay a bundle of papers tied with twine. They were letters, written in a shaky hand, the ink blotched as though penned in agitation. Poirot drew one out and unfolded it. His eyes moved quickly across the page. "You condemned an innocent man. My brother paid with his life for your pride. You will not silence me forever. Either you make amends, or your reputation will be torn from you, as you tore justice from him." Poirot raised his brows, slipping the letter back into its envelope. He examined another, and another. All bore the same hand, all demanded money, or silence. The name of the condemned man appeared, one Thomas Cole. "Cole," murmured Poirot, his moustaches twitching. "Ah, parbleu. So that is the connection. The Reverend, he is brother to the dead man. He sought retribution." Briggs shifted uneasily. "That looks bad for the clergyman, sir." Poirot tapped the bundle thoughtfully. "It looks, yes. But often what looks bad is too convenient. We must ask ourselves, would a man so timid, so nervous as the Reverend, strike with poison at the dinner table? Poison, it is not the weapon of impulse, but of calculation. He may blackmail, but murder? I am not yet convinced." He set the letters neatly aside, then moved to the fireplace. Upon the grate lay the charred remains of paper. Poirot stooped, lifting a fragment with the tips of his fingers. The word funds could still be discerned, though the rest was gone. "Interesting," he murmured. "A different hand, a different matter. Something burned, something that spoke of money. But whose?" His eyes roved further, alighting upon a small cabinet in the corner. It contained bottles of sherry, brandy, and Madeira. Poirot inspected them closely. The cork of one Madeira bottle bore a faint stain. He sniffed delicately, but no bitter almond reached his nostrils. Still, he made a mental note. "Sergeant, you see? The means were here, wine, available to all in this household. The opportunity, then, must be sought. Who had the chance to tamper with a single glass? Briggs frowned. Could have been any one of them. Decanter filled before dinner, glasses poured by the butler. Just so, said Poirot. Yet Harcourt poured each glass in turn, under all our eyes. So, if the poison was already in the decanter, more than one would have perished. But it was only Sir Reginald. Therefore, the glass was singled out. That, Sergeant, is what you must reflect upon. They replaced the documents carefully, locking the drawer once more. Poirot thanked the sergeant and returned to the corridor. Alone again, he allowed himself a smile of quiet satisfaction. The study had yielded more than papers, it had yielded psychology. At luncheon, the company assembled once more, subdued and uneasy. Poirot observed each as they entered. Reverend Cole's eyes avoided his, Clara appeared pale, though her hands were steady, Mrs. Statham looked serenely composed, Julian's expression was sullen, defiant, Lady Ashcroft leaned heavily upon her cane, her grief now tinged with apprehension. Dr. Larch presided with professional assurance, as though his very calmness might steady the others. Poirot cleared his throat. This morning, Miss Amos, I had occasion to inspect Sir Reginald's study. There, I found certain documents of interest. A ripple of unease passed among them. Poirot went on, his tone mild but his eyes keen. There were letters of blackmail, written by one who accused Sir Reginald of condemning an innocent man. The signature, it was not present. But the name of the condemned, Thomas Cole. Reverend Cole gave a strangled cry. It is true, he burst out. My brother, he was hanged for a crime he did not commit. Sir Reginald destroyed him with his arrogance. I sought only acknowledgement, reparation, never this. His voice faltered, and he sank into his chair, trembling. The others stared at him, aghast. Julian muttered under his breath, so the holy man has claws after all. Poirot raised his hand. Do not be too quick, Monsieur Julian. Blackmail, yes. But poison? That requires a different courage. The Reverend, he trembles at the shadow of suspicion. Such a man may threaten, but would he kill? That, we must consider with care. Mrs. Statham's voice, cool and measured, cut through the tension. Whatever his protests, Monsieur Poirot, it seems plain that Reverend Cole had motive enough. A brother unjustly condemned, that is no small grievance. Poirot inclined his head. True, madam. Yet remember this, when the truth seems too plain, it is often misleading. One must always look deeper. His gaze moved slowly round the table, resting a moment longer upon Dr. Larch than upon the others. The doctor met his look steadily, but Poirot thought he saw, just for an instant, a flicker of unease. Miss Amos, Poirot concluded, the net begins to tighten. There are secrets here, yes, but not all secrets end in murder. We must not mistake smoke for fire. Patience will reveal the guilty hand. The silence that followed was thick with suspicion. Each guest shifted uneasily beneath Poirot's calm gaze. In his little notebook that night, Poirot wrote but a single line. Reverend Cole, blackmailer, yes. Murderer, perhaps no. The true hand still hides, but not for long. Chapter 6, A Garden Conversation. The morning mist had lifted, giving way to a pale autumn sun. The grounds of Ashcroft Manor, though touched with the season's chill, carried a deceptive calm. The lawns were trimmed to perfection, the flower-beds still bore late blooms of rose and chrysanthemum, and the ancient oaks stood silent and watchful. Poirot, after the tension of luncheon, felt the need for air. He stepped into the garden, his neat shoes crunching lightly upon the gravel path. His eyes, ever alert, took in not only the beauty of the scene but also the quiet movements of those about him. Julian smoked restlessly near the yew hedge, tossing his cigarette ends with careless disdain. Reverend Cole paced along a shaded avenue, lips moving in silent prayer. And Clara Whitfield, pale and thoughtful, walked slowly toward the fountain at the center of the lawn. Poirot adjusted his cuffs and made his way to Clara with the unhurried grace that was so characteristic of him. "Mademoiselle," he said gently, a little air, "it is good, n'est-ce pas? It clears the head when the house grows heavy with suspicion." Clara looked up, startled, then forced a faint smile. "Yes, Monsieur Poirot." I could not bear the drawing-room a moment longer. Every face seemed to watch me, every whisper seemed about me. "Ah," Poirot said softly, "and is it not so, that when one carries a burden, one imagines it reflected in every glance? That is why, perhaps, you avoid their eyes." Her cheeks colored faintly. "You think I am hiding something?" Poirot inclined his head with exquisite politeness. "Not hiding, mademoiselle, protecting. There is a difference." He offered his arm, and together they strolled toward the fountain. The water splashed gently, a soothing sound amidst the unease. Poirot studied Clara's profile, the delicate features, the eyes shadowed with anxiety. "You are devoted to Lady Ashcroft," he said. "I see it in the way you attend her, anticipate her needs. Such loyalty is admirable. But it is not always easy, no." Clara hesitated. "Lady Ashcroft has been kind to me. She gave me a place in her household when I had none. I owe her everything." Poirot's moustaches twitched. "And yet, gratitude can sometimes be mingled with resentment. The debt of kindness, it weighs upon the spirit. Especially if the heart is pulled elsewhere." Her eyes widened. "You mean, Julian?" "Just so. You went to his room last night, after the house had retired." Poirot spoke with quiet certainty, not accusation. Clara caught her breath. "You saw me." "I saw," he said gently. "But I do not condemn. The heart, it does not ask permission before it loves." Clara sank upon the stone bench by the fountain, covering her face with her hands. "It is true," she whispered. "Julian and I, we have cared for each other for months. But Lady Ashcroft would never approve. She sees me as a dependent, unworthy of her son. If she discovered the truth—" Poirot sat beside her, his voice calm, soothing. "So you conceal the affection. And Mrs. Statham, she knows, does she not? That is the secret of which you spoke together." "Yes." Clara lifted her head, her eyes bright with unshed tears. She advised silence. She said to reveal it now, in the midst of all this horror, would be disastrous. It would cast suspicion upon Julian, as though our secrecy made us guilty. Poirot nodded thoughtfully. "It is often thus. A secret, once hidden, grows heavier with every hour. Yet take courage, mademoiselle. To love is not to murder. Remember that." Clara's gaze searched his face. "You believe us innocent?" Poirot spread his hands in a delicate gesture. "I believe you capable of devotion, not of poison. But others, they may think differently. That is why, for now, we keep this confidence between us." Clara shivered. "If only I could be sure. Sir Reginald despised Julian. He said terrible things, cruel things. If they quarrelled again that night—" "Ah," Poirot interrupted softly, "quarrels are but smoke. It is the hand that pours the poison which matters. And that hand, I think, is yet hidden." They sat in silence a moment, the fountain splashing steadily. Across the lawn, Julian threw down another cigarette and stalked into the house, his shoulders rigid with suppressed anger. Reverend Cole knelt upon the grass, his face lifted in prayer. Poirot rose, offering his hand to Clara. "Courage, mademoiselle. Walk as though you fear nothing, and perhaps you will fear less. The truth, it comes always to the light, especially when Hercule Poirot is here to bring it. Clara managed a trembling smile and took his hand. Thank you, Monsieur Poirot. You give me more comfort than you know. They returned toward the house, but Poirot's mind was already busy. Clara's confession confirmed what he had suspected. Her love for Julian was real, her secrecy dangerous, but neither spoke directly of guilt. Still, secrets were threads in the web, and each must be traced to its center. Back inside, Poirot found Mrs. Statham in the morning room, engaged in a letter. She looked up with cool composure as he entered. Monsieur Poirot, she said smoothly, you are indefatigable. Already you have turned the house inside out. Poirot bowed slightly. The truth, madam, it is like a shy bird, it must be coaxed from its hiding place. Tell me, do you still advise silence to our young friend Clara? Mrs. Statham's eyes narrowed slightly. So she has confided in you. Well, I am not surprised. You have a way of loosening tongues. Yes, I told her to keep silent. What good would it do to parade a clandestine romance before this household, under such circumstances? It would only give the inspector a motive where none exists. Ah, Poirot murmured, but silence can itself appear as guilt. Do you not fear that? Mrs. Statham gave a thin smile. My dear monsieur, I have lived long enough to know that appearances matter more than truth. Better to appear discreet than reckless. Poirot studied her closely. Madam, you are clever. But I wonder, do you not conceal something more than discretion? For I think you guard not only Clara, but yourself. Her expression did not falter. We all have things we prefer to keep private, Monsieur Poirot. That does not make us murderers. Poirot inclined his head gravely. No, madam. But it does make the puzzle more interesting. He left her, his mind turning over the pieces once more. Clara's love, Julian's temper, Mrs. Statham's counsel, Reverend Cole's blackmail, all these threads tangled around Sir Reginald's death. Yet somewhere in the tangle lay the single knot, the true motive, the hand that had slipped poison into one glass alone. As Poirot ascended the staircase to his chamber, he smiled faintly. The garden, it has given me the flower of truth. But the root, it still lies hidden beneath the soil. I must dig deeper. Chapter 7, The Trap is Set. The following evening, Ashcroft Manor sat in a peculiar hush, as though the very walls waited for revelation. Inspector Wetherell and Sergeant Briggs remained in residence, frustrated by the tangle of motives but grateful for Poirot's guiding hand. Poirot himself, however, appeared unusually serene, as though he had already begun to see the shape of the truth. At supper he announced with quiet authority, Miss Amis, I have requested that tonight we gather once more in the dining room, precisely as we did upon the evening of Sir Reginald's death. It is important that we retrace the pattern, that we observe what was then, and what is now. A murmur of unease ran around the table. Clara grew pale, Julian frowned, Lady Ashcroft shivered, and Mrs. Statham raised an arched brow. Only Dr. Larch maintained a studied calm, and Reverend Cole crossed himself nervously. Surely, Monsieur Poirot, Lady Ashcroft protested weakly, such a reenactment is morbid. Poirot's moustaches twitched with gentle firmness. Morbid, perhaps. Necessary, most certainly. You will permit me. There was no refusal. And so, when the hour struck 8, the household gathered once more at the long mahogany table. Harcourt, the butler, solemnly poured wine into the crystal glasses, his hand steady though his eyes betrayed tension. Poirot stood at the head of the table, his small figure commanding quiet authority. We are here, mesdames et messieurs, to observe not the past but the present. Each of you, you will sit as you sat that evening. Each will receive a glass, just so. But tonight, he raised a finger, the glasses are marked, discreetly. Already I know which glass belonged to Sir Reginald. We shall see what knowledge you each betray." Julian gave a short laugh, more bravado than amusement. "You mean to watch us squirm?" Poirot's eyes glinted. "I mean to watch, yes. But also to listen." The company Saturday. Lady Ashcroft to Poirot's right, Clara beside her, then Mrs. Statham. Across the table, Julian, Reverend Cole, and finally Dr. Larch. Harcourt moved silently, setting down the decanter and pouring the ruby wine. Poirot's keen gaze followed every motion. "Observe," Poirot said softly, the butler paused with impartiality. "Yet last time, only one glass carried death. How, then, was it chosen?" The silence grew thick. Clara's hands trembled upon her lap, Julian scowled into his glass, Cole muttered a prayer. Poirot, meanwhile, continued with the delicacy of a surgeon. Sir Reginald was not an easy man. He had quarrels, yes? He inspired resentment, fear, even hatred. You each had cause. But only one of you had the precision to act. Only one selected his glass at just the right moment. Mrs. Statham's voice, cool and cutting, broke the silence. "This performance, Monsieur Poirot, it is little more than theatre. What do you hope to achieve?" Poirot bowed slightly. "Ah, madam, theatre is the mirror of truth. Watch carefully, you will see how the guilty hand betrays itself." He moved around the table, pausing behind each guest, observing their posture, their breathing, the flicker of their eyes. At Julian's shoulder, he noted the clenched jaw, at Clara's side, the quickening pulse. But it was at Dr. Larch's place that Poirot lingered. The doctor sat composed, yet when Poirot's shadow fell across him, his fingers tightened imperceptibly around the stem of his glass. Poirot resumed his place. "Now, Miss Amos, consider this, Sir Reginald had enemies beyond this household. He was blackmailed by one who sought revenge for an unjustly condemned brother. That we know. But blackmail, it is not murder. The blackmailer seeks money, the murderer, silence." Reverend Cole flushed crimson. "I admit the letters were mine. I sought to shame him, not kill him. I would not dare poison." Poirot inclined his head gravely. "Just so. And that, Miss Amos, is why we must look elsewhere. For there was another secret, one burned in the grate of Sir Reginald's study. A fragment of paper, bearing the word funds. Something financial, something dangerous." Lady Ashcroft gave a low cry. Reginald spoke of it, only days ago. He had discovered irregularities. He intended to confront them. Poirot spread his hands delicately. "And so, the motive is clearer. Someone feared exposure. Exposure not of passion, nor of resentment, but of fraud." The guests exchanged uneasy glances. Mrs. Statham's brow furrowed, Julian's expression darkened, Clara shrank into silence. Poirot's voice dropped, compelling. "Consider the doctor. He had access to poisons, knowledge of their use. He was present at Sir Reginald's side, able to direct suspicion away. Yet what if his calmness concealed more? What if it was he who most feared discovery?" Dr. Larch's composure wavered. "This is absurd. I am a man of medicine. To suggest I—" Poirot raised a hand. "Absurd? Perhaps. But observe, the hand trembles when it touches the glass. The eyes avoid mine when I speak of fraud. It is in the little things, always, that the truth is found." The tension was unbearable. Clara gasped, Julian half rose, only to sink back down. The inspector shifted uneasily, ready to intervene. Poirot allowed the silence to swell, then said gently, "Do not fear. Tonight is not the unmasking. Tonight is only the setting of the trap. The true revelation, it will come soon." A collective breath was released. Dr. Larch, though pale, forced a thin smile. "You play a dangerous game, Monsieur Poirot." Poirot's eyes twinkled. "But of course. It is in the game that the guilty betray themselves." He dismissed them with a graceful bow. "Go, Miss Amos. Sleep, if you can. Tomorrow, perhaps, we shall speak more clearly." When the guests had departed, Poirot remained in the dining room with Inspector Wetherell. The inspector looked puzzled. "I must say, Poirot, I thought you had him then, the doctor. Why not press harder?" Poirot smiled faintly. "Because, mon ami, the wasp flies more boldly when it believes itself unseen. Already the guilty one grows careless. Tomorrow night, I will draw the net tight. Tonight, I wished only to stir the waters, so that the fish may show itself." He bent over his notebook, writing a single sentence. "The poisoner is revealed not by what he says, but by what he fears." Then, closing the book with care, Poirot extinguished the lamp. The trap had been set. Soon, very soon, it would spring. Chapter 8: The Final Revelation. The household gathered in the drawing-room the following evening at Poirot's request. A fire burned brightly upon the hearth, throwing long shadows across the panelled walls. The atmosphere was electric, each guest taut with expectation. Inspector Wetherell and Sergeant Briggs stood watchfully to one side, prepared for whatever storm might break. Poirot entered with his usual unhurried grace, his hands folded neatly behind his back, his moustaches waxed to perfection. He surveyed the company with keen, twinkling eyes. "Miss Amos," he began, "the hour has come. For days, whispers have stirred in these corridors, secrets have weighed upon your hearts. Tonight, we bring all into the light. You wish to know who placed the poison in Sir Reginald's glass. You shall know." A ripple of unease swept the room. Clara clutched the arm of her chair, Julian leaned forward tensely, Lady Ashcroft looked pale but resolute. Mrs. Statham's expression was unreadable, while Dr. Larch remained outwardly composed. Reverend Cole clasped his hands as if in prayer. Poirot moved to the centre of the room. "Let us review. First, the Reverend. We discovered in Sir Reginald's study the letters of blackmail, written by you, Monsieur Cole. You sought vengeance for your brother, Thomas Cole, whom Sir Reginald condemned. Yet you tremble, you falter, you lack the cold precision of the poisoner. You wished shame, not death. You are guilty of extortion, yes, but not of murder." Cole gave a sob of relief, tears glistening in his eyes. "Bless you, Monsieur Poirot." Poirot turned. "Then, young Julian. You quarrelled with your uncle, you were impatient for inheritance. You loved where you should not, yet you are not cunning. Your anger is loud, not silent. A man such as you, he strikes with his fists, not with a vial. You, too, are not the murderer." Julian flushed, half relieved, half resentful. Clara reached for his hand, though her own trembled. "Clara Whitfield," Poirot continued gently. "You concealed your love for Julian. You feared Lady Ashcroft's disapproval, Mrs. Statham's scrutiny. But you are loyal, devoted. Your secrecy springs from fear, not malice. You had no motive to silence Sir Reginald, though he might have opposed your union. You are innocent." Clara's eyes filled with tears. Poirot paced slowly, his small shoes tapping lightly. "Lady Ashcroft, grief-stricken, yes. You depended upon your brother-in-law, but you did not hate him. You feared scandal more than death. But murder? None, madam, your hands are clean." Lady Ashcroft gave a shuddering sigh, clutching her handkerchief. Poirot's gaze settled upon Mrs. Statham. "And you, madam, you are wise, discreet, perhaps too discreet. You counselled silence, you spoke of appearances. Yet appearances are not crimes. You conceal, yes, but only to protect Clara. You had no quarrel with Sir Reginald. You are not the hand that killed him. Mrs. Statham's lips curved in a faint smile, though her eyes glittered sharply. Poirot paused before the fire. So, who remains? Who has the knowledge, the opportunity, and the fear of discovery? Who trembled when the glass was set before him at supper? Who alone could have silenced Sir Reginald, lest his own ruin be exposed? Miss Amiss, the murderer is Dr. Larch. There was a collective gasp. Clara gave a cry, Lady Ashcroft pressed her hand to her mouth, and Julian sprang to his feet. Dr. Larch alone remained seated, though his face drained of colour. This is outrageous, he said coolly. I was Sir Reginald's physician, his friend. You cannot. But Poirot raised a finger. Attend, if you please. Sir Reginald, shortly before his death, discovered certain irregularities, financial misdeeds. The burned fragment in his grate bore the word funds. He had found that money entrusted to your care, doctor, had been diverted. He meant to expose you. You faced disgrace, the loss of your practice, your livelihood. You, more than any other, had reason to silence him. Dr. Larch's composure wavered. Mere conjecture. Non, monsieur, Poirot said firmly. More than conjecture. You alone possessed the knowledge of poisons. You could introduce it unseen, not into the decanter, that would endanger all, but into a single glass. When Harcourt poured, you stood ready. With a physician's steadiness, you shifted Sir Reginald's glass by the smallest degree, the merest touch, ensuring that it alone bore death. And afterwards, with professional authority, you declared the cause. Who would doubt the word of the doctor? Inspector Wetherell's eyes blazed. By heaven, yes. That's it. Poirot inclined his head. At supper last night, I observed you closely. When I spoke of fraud, your fingers tightened upon your glass, your eyes turned aside. You betrayed yourself not in words, but in fear. And now, I think, you know the game is finished. The room held its breath. For a long moment, Dr. Larch said nothing. Then he rose slowly, his shoulders sagging. The mask of composure slipped, revealing weariness, bitterness. You are clever, Monsieur Poirot, he said hoarsely. Too clever. Yes, it is true. I had no choice. He would have ruined me. All I had built, all I had worked for, gone. I thought, one glass, one dose, and the problem would be solved. He was an old man. His passing would not shock the world. But I miscalculated. I did not reckon on you. Inspector Wetherell stepped forward, placing a heavy hand upon his shoulder. Dr. Larch, I must arrest you for the murder of Sir Reginald Ashcroft. Dr. Larch bowed his head, defeated. Briggs led him from the room. For a moment, silence reigned. Then Lady Ashcroft whispered, Monsieur Poirot, how can we ever thank you? Poirot spread his hands modestly. It is nothing, madam. I only employ the little grey cells. The truth, it always reveals itself when one observes the smallest details. Clara clung to Julian's arm, her tears now tears of relief. Reverend Cole murmured prayers of gratitude. Mrs. Statham, though silent, regarded Poirot with something like admiration. Poirot, standing by the fire, allowed himself a small, satisfied smile. Justice, Miss Amiss, has been done. Sir Reginald was not a kind man, perhaps, but he did not deserve such an end. Now, he may rest. And you may live again, free of suspicion. The flames crackled, the shadows danced. Outside, the wind sighed through the oaks. Inside, the great detective's work was complete. Hercule Poirot smoothed his moustaches and murmured, almost to himself, "Order and method, that is all that is required." Always, the truth lies waiting, if only one is patient enough to see.